All right, so we'll go ahead and get started this morning. I think we've got pretty close to what we were looking for attendance. So thanks for joining us. This is a newer format for me, so bear with me as I try not to fall into presentation mode. Right, the intent is to try to have a bit of a tech discussion with Matt and JD and myself, and um, I'll be functioning as a moderator. Facilitator here. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll either answer them in line or at the end. So kind of free for all there. So today we're talking user-defined polling, right? So a little bit of what is it, why is it, how we've gotten to where we're at, right? So from an Entuity standpoint, user-defined polling's been a part of the product for a long time, limited to the SNMP, right? And giving the ability to, discover and onboard custom devices, right? So there's always going to be a use case where there's just something that's not that common, right? We see it sometimes with environmental sensors, but also less common networking hardware or devices, right? So as the networking industry has started to change, more software defined, more Web 2.0 bleeding into the network manager's life, we see that diversity growing, right? So with the ability to do networking and software, there's a lot more solutions out there, right? So 20 years ago it was Cisco or Juniper, right? And now it's a lot more platforms. I think we're seeing. And we're also seeing that evolution from SNMP to just not being enough, right? And that's fair, right? SNMP was written in a time that was a little bit simpler, and so a lot of the standardization has been around APIs. Specifically, we see a lot of RESTful APIs, and so one of the features we looked at was kind of bringing that concept of user-defined polling, right, from the SNMP subsystems, and applying that for APIs. So that is, I'll stop with the monologue section, right, and transition into a little bit more discussion and the good parts, right? I want to lean in with Matt and JD. They are both have more Intuity experience and probably experience with you folks too. So JD, maybe you could talk a little bit about, from your perspective, how we landed at REST, or why that was kind of the direction we went.
Basically, we're following industry trends. The majority of modern services and products that have gone beyond SNMP, rather than going in totally proprietary manners, which is what's been happening over the last few years. More recently, there's been a trend to adopt some form of standardization, and the industry has landed on REST. So that's what we have leveraged in a way that we can gather information, pull information in from a wide array of data sources. They might be pieces of equipment, they might be services associated with networking, they might be completely non-networking services. And in fact, I've got a good example for you here, which I just want to show you how I've brought in some weather data. Now, obviously, that's not network data, could be very handy in a network operations center, which is looking after a wide geographic range of distributed equipment where they may have some severe weather impacting various parts of the network. But let me just show you. I've got a system up and running that I've set up a ping-only device. I'm going to go in, find it. I've actually called it Mayfield Heights. So it's not gathering anything useful using ping, but I've set up a RESTful API poller and created a custom dashboard. And I'll just show you the end effect before I go into how this was created. You'll see here over the last 24 hours in Mayfield Heights, Ohio, which is the location of the Park Place headquarters, we've got the temperature, 5-minute samples of temperature, wind speed, pressure, humidity, and cloudiness down the bottom here. And that is all gathered using the new RESTful API poller. I'm going to show you briefly how that is accessed. It's through the admin page rather than just one user-defined poller, which is what we've had up till now. We've split out SNMP and REST polling. The SNMP polling is exactly what you had before. And now we have this new option, the user-defined REST polling. And in fact, I'm not going to give you all of the detail because if you were to go to the online help, down to the video section and down to video tutorials, what you're now going to see is a video tutorial which I've just released on this topic. Takes you through all of the detail, how I actually set up this example that I'm about to show you. So in here, you'll see that the RESTful polling section has multiple tabs up in the top of the UI. And the general idea is that this is a wizard approach to creating the configuration. You work from left to right. The overview just has a brief introduction to the topic. Pollers gives you a list of all defined pollers. Now, if you're starting up without any, you're just going to immediately go to the overview. You'll click it onto the pollers. I've got one already defined. This is the weather poller, and I'm leveraging a service called openweathermap.org. You can apply to that website for your own API key, which will allow you to pull various different weather statistics from them. I'm going to go in and edit that, and you'll see that we've already stepped onto this general tab. This is where you name the poller. Each poller is going to be able to bring in one or multiple attributes, which we'll get to in a moment. This defines the polling rate and the retention period. It also defines which devices are going to be allowed to use this poller. You have to have licensed devices to use it with. You can't use it on what we call a custom device because that's not a licensed device. So here, this is why I set up this ping-only device. And I've said I wanted it to be associated with the poller. This poller's got one step. This is a very simple example. If I go over to that step, you'll see it's pulling in through this URL, which has been set up according to the documentation on the openweathermap.org site, how to pull in information for this zip code. This is the host that we're going to be pulling it from, and there's a very handy test button up in the top right-hand corner that launches that URL as spelled out exactly here, and it shows you exactly what's come back. This is the JSON body that came back, and you can see lots of weather-related statistics, including temperature, humidity, pressure, visibility, lots of good stuff here to get your teeth into. We've got a couple of facilities I've not leveraged in this example. The first one is parameterization. Each part of that URL is broken out into its own constituent parts. This means that they can actually be substituted, replaced with other information, and that can be dynamically developed values. This is particularly important where you've got a multi-step operation. And that's the sort of thing you would do if, for example, you have to do a login operation that returns an API key, and then you do the operation that uses the API key. So that's an example of a double-step operation. And you can also then create variables that are then used to plug back into that parameterize page so that you can be selecting parts of the URL dynamically and dynamically constructing it. The attributes is where it really deviates from the way that we did the SNMP polling. With SNMP, every entry in the SNMP poller defines an attribute. Here, the nature of REST is that it can return many pieces of information, as it did when I showed you running that URL. It returned a lot of weather information. You can set up as many attributes as you want. You're always going to need at least one, and define exactly how the data is to be formatted and displayed. And you can also set up thresholding. If I were to edit this temperature definition, you'll see that down the bottom here, I've mapped it to a threshold so that you can get warnings when it goes either above or below a defined threshold. Finally, there's a summary tab. My advice is don't forget this step because there's the save button. When you're doing any form of creation of the config or editing it, don't forget to go to the summary and save it. Not that I've ever done that myself, you understand. So we've got all of that defined, and I showed you the end result, which was the dashboard. One quick point I would like to just make clear, if I were to go to that device, and if you were to go to the attributes dashboard, you're not going to see any of that weather information. There's nothing here labeled temperature. The reason being, it's not an attribute of the device. What we do is create a new object that contains the REST API polled information. You'll see here that there is this object. This is the name I gave it that is associated to the device. That, when I select it, if I go to the attributes dashboard, that is going to show the information that I pulled in from REST, the pressure, the humidity, the temperature, the wind speed, etc.
So JD, can you walk us through the software development tools and how many people it would take on a team to build something like this out?
This basically is an hour or two's worth of work once you understand what it is you're looking for. The beauty of this is that you're not writing software. You're going in and you're clicking stuff off a menu. And so here, critically, if I were to go and edit this particular poller, if I went to the attributes, you saw that it returned a JSON body. If I were to add a new attribute into here, filling in the source path, which is where to go pluck it out of the JSON body, you don't have to fill it in yourself here. We provide a data explorer. This gives you a tree structured view of that JSON body that came back. In this case, if I open up this section called main, here are all of those parameters that I talked about. If I wanted the temperature, I just select it, say done, and it has filled it in. So this is a great aid to civilization when it comes to rapidly pulling stuff out of the data that's being returned.
So JD, obviously we're digging into the weather, and I know that right now it feels timely. But you know, and from a you know, NOC or operation center perspective, weather's always been one of the you know, one of the data points you want to look at. Is there hurricanes that might be why, you know, Florida sites are down or something like that? But you know, kind of thinking past this proof of concept example, you know, from your experience working with customers and doing a lot of monitoring work around Entuity, what other use cases do you think are out there?
Well, I think Matt is in a very good position to address that one. You've been looking at some really interesting network-centric examples, haven't you, Matt?
I have it. Yeah. So if I just share my screen, I can show everyone a couple of the examples I've put together. 2 seconds. So I'll start off with going to the press polling page again. And you can see I've created some pollers here. The ones I'll delve into is you've got a couple of Cisco ones here. So they're using the Cisco support API. And from that, we can get end of life data and product info. So if I just show you, so obviously JD's gone through sort of all the menus here. You'll see this one has 2 steps. And the first step is to authenticate. So with the Cisco API, we send a post request to a URL with a client ID and a secret, and that returns an access token, which we store as a variable. And then if I just go back to our poller and select the second step, you can see here in our headers, we're then using this access token that we stored as a variable for the authentication for this call to the end of life API. And you'll see in my URL here, we've got a serial number. So that's just a serial number I've taken from one of the devices that this server's managing. If we then moved on to the Parameterize tab, you can see here that part of the path, I've created a replacement with a placeholder that gets us the serial number of the device. So you may have seen here, I've got 4 devices. So when this poller runs, it's going to pull in the serial number of one of those each of those devices and use it in the URL to get the information for that specific device. And then you'll see here, as JD just showed, I've got some data, some attributes, sorry, from this API. So we've got end of sale date, end of software maintenance date, last date of support, and end of security vulnerability dates. And if I go back into our dashboards, oops, I didn't want to leave that, sorry. You can see here I've created this dashboard, and we've got just the device's name, model, version, serial number, and then the information we're pulling from the API. So you've got an orderable status, which actually came from the product info API, so whether it's orderable, end of life, and then we've got the dates for these different models of Cisco equipment. So that's sort of one use case that's I think would be pretty useful. And then the other use case is pulling in information from a CMDB. So in this example, we're using ServiceNow. Again, this has got 5 devices we've chosen here. And there's only one step in this because we just have to provide a username and password. But you'll see again in the URL, we have a parameter name equals and then the name of the device. So what I've done here is replace that with another placeholder to get the device's name. And if we went to the attributes, and I just show you the data explorer here, we can then pull in any information within ServiceNow for that device into Entuity. And you can see I've created a couple of attributes, install status and operational status. And then if we just have a look at this dashboard here, I've created a couple of columns in it. And you can see we've got the retired, pending repair, non-operational, installed and operational. So we've got the different bits of information from the CMDB about that device. And like JD mentioned, we could potentially raise events on these, or you could even report on this, or for example, the end of life stuff, you could run reports on as well.
Sorry, I'm loving this, right? So I think that when we look at that, like alert status, right, of like these are critical, but then I go look at CMDB and it's retired, right? As a tools admin, right, I can very quickly go, okay, well it's retired in CMDB and it's down. I'm gonna turn off monitoring, right? Like I'm ready to go. Somebody, missed my ticket or whatever, but that's fine. I'm happy. Or if you're an operations person and I see that it's pending repair in the CMDB, right, then I expect it to be done, right? So these are this is like a really interesting enrichment use case, right, of saying, what other tools exist in the environment, how can we integrate and pull? So I really dig this as somebody who's been the eyes on the screen at 2 a.m. And gotten that phone call, right, both times, right? Integrating the data together would have helped a bunch. So that's really neat. So Tim had asked about, for Cisco, could we do vulnerability upgrade information, right? So Matt, you had shown, kind of passing them the serial number off the device, but we can pass any of the device attributes as parameters to an API, right?
You can, and I think Cisco have a open vulnerability API. I believe that's what it's called, something along those lines. And you can pass it just the iOS version, and it will return you information about that iOS version, known vulnerabilities and fixes for them, or which version it's fixed in. I think it can tell us.
No, that's great. And then as you start to chain together some of these techniques, right, you could, raise tickets with a ServiceNow integration to say we found a vulnerability for a piece of kit, right? Or raise incidents to go check config management, right? We really start to build out the kind of left to right workflow for device management, right? Beyond monitoring, but getting into that, how do you take care of the estate? This is exciting stuff. It's great to see this live in the system. So what I would say is this is a new feature for us, right? So we've this just launched in version 20, and anybody who's been around enterprise software long enough knows that the first version isn't the last version, right? So I know we've got some enhancements and some pieces coming in. Well, I don't want to put a number on it, but the Q3 patch, right, as it were, right? Sometimes declaring a number on those will jinx them. So we'll just say the Q3 patch has some there, and I would say that as people on the call start to get version 20 running and working through use cases, right? I think part of this Tech Talk series and further engagement, right? The hope is, you guys will reach out with questions or how-tos or, I wish it would, right? I always say that the people who use the product every day are going to have the better ideas for what it should do, than sometimes product teams will. So definitely not. We're not at the end. I think this is the beginning of kind of embracing that API piece and both for custom devices or these enrichment use cases. I think these are pretty fascinating from a whole. Yeah. So, are there any other questions? I know Sergio had clapped for us and said source path. JD, do you get the excitement there?
Absolutely. It's one thing to see data coming back nice and cleanly in something like a JSON structure, but to be able to just point at a tree structured representation and say, I want that, click, and you've got it. That really not only speeds things up, but it improves predictability and reliability. Far less opportunity for a bit of finger trouble, shall we say.
Sure. No, that's who hasn't ran afoul of some bad typing or the typo that your brain doesn't see, right? Those are the worst. So Sergio, you're saying a vendor files, is this kind of is there a standard here that some vendors use as like an API map, or is this like a community type site where we could do some sharing around wins between customers and JD and Matt? Software as a service enrichment use case. We use Sectico CA. So, Tim, you're asking what the use case would be around pulling in some SaaS. So beyond the ServiceNow CMDB, but you're saying like performance and availability for your Sectigo, right? And almost monitoring them via their management API and turning it into an Entuity event kind of thing. Did I capture that right? Oh, okay, yeah, I think that's I would say that's the A path, right? Of can we instrument and monitor API-driven devices, right? That was the consensus. There's some limitations around like parent-child devices that exist in the current release. So the API puller wouldn't be great if you were going to hit like an Azure API and then try to climb all the way down to virtual machine objects or something. I think the patch, the third quarter patch, I almost slipped. Will have some of that functionality to help there. But for right now, if we had you know, a requirement around, a specific, is it up or is it performant? I think that's maybe the initial user story that generated a lot of this development, right? So yeah, definitely that'd be a good one. And so that's so Sergio, that is what you meant. So community sharing, exportable, importable between Entuity servers, Entuity estates, right? And maybe some more of like what JD's put together for the weather here, but maybe actually more what Matt put together for Cisco, right? Some real functionals, right? So I think that's a great idea.
One thing that can be very handy there is that within the API of the product itself, we've added functions that will allow you to export and import the REST API polar definitions. So once you've prepared it, you can export it through our API, and that's in a form that can then be imported elsewhere. So that would be a publishable form.
So we'd use the API to manipulate the API polar so that we could have APIs do our API. There's a meme in there, but no, that's a good call out. So I think we're up against our scheduled, or where are we at here? Just a time check. No, it looks like we've got a little more time. Sorry about that. Business analysis script to organize the instrumenting of a use case would be useful. So Tim, you're just thinking like what is the process flow, or what data do we need to gather to, maybe reach out to that application owner for Sectigo to say, hey, here's what I need, right? Here's my data gathering so that I can instrument this in Entuity. Okay, yeah, I think that's probably something that we could put together and probably even put on the support site or something like that. I think that'd be a really interesting use case, right? Because otherwise it's a pretty big quantum of what's possible, right? When you say I want to monitor an API, I always am frustrated with when I hear that, because it feels a lot like DIY, right? Like it's a brush off, you can do what you want, right? But I think that the kind of WYSIWYG wizard approach helps with that. Well, if we get time this afternoon, we'll add that to the list too, Tim. That sounds like a worthy endeavor. So now's the part where I'll ask if there's any feedback around today's session. I know this was a little bit different as far as things goes, both for us and maybe what normally happens, right? But we wanted to get out of that, here's a deck and I've pre-rehearsed, right? Kind of move. Pull inventory back via API and then create them as associated devices. So this would be CMDB data, for example, being pulled by Entuity to then add a device under management based on a matching condition? I just want to make sure I read your sentence and understood it right. For that question, Parker or Chris or maybe a conference room, it looks like. So JD, assuming that I did hear that right.
I think we would need to have a bit of a think about that one. Not prepared at this point to say it would either be doable or not if that was a case of identifying devices that were not already under management that is known to a CMDB for automatic adding.
No, I'm reading his follow-up. So this is the Q3 patch, right? So right now, the parent-child associated relationship is in development, right? So for now, we can do single devices without getting into the associated piece, right? So you would have to build out at each tier a different polar today. In the Q3 patch, that's where the functionality around that associated device or parent-child, right, being able to hit an API endpoint and then like monitor below, that's when that'll come in.
That's correct. So the ability to basically go after controllers which are responsible for managing N pieces of gear. That is where the Q3 patch is really going to open this up to that type of use case.
Yep. The kind of the Meraki use case, right? Of
Exactly.
hit a single endpoint and manage everything. Yep.
Yep. In fact, Matt, you even took a look at Meraki at the moment, and as far as the controller goes, we're pulling everything we can already directly from the controller about the controller. But when it comes to the story about the end devices that the controller is responsible for, that's the next step beyond.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's exciting. Clayton, integration with Grafana in the future. I don't know that I follow all the way what you would be thinking about there, right? Or maybe I don't know enough about Grafana, which is very possible. Yeah, no, that's good feedback, right? So maybe thinking about how we could share development priorities or plans a little bit more with the community. That's a good ask, Tim. I know that we do a lot of that, more one-to-one as opposed to one-to-many type sessions, but yeah, good feedback. And then I would say, I know that on the last call that there was some talk about G2 reviews, right? So if I'll just do my plug for that's super helpful for us from a feedback perspective, and definitely something we're keeping an eye on and trying to be engaged in the G2 community around, the offering. Oh, I see. So does Grafana also store the data, or does it pull it in real time?
Certainly, if you're just trying to use Grafana to visualize information from Entuity, we already have capability to export arbitrary data on request from our inbuilt API in the product. So that is the way I would be looking. So from this standpoint, I think the Grafana use cases can be addressed via the product API.
I was going to say, it sounds like it's likely supported now, right? If we wanted to pull in managed devices or CPU usage or something, right? That's kind of the use case, I think, right?
If you wanted to augment that with information that we don't already have, that is available from a REST API elsewhere, then of course the REST poller would come into its own, both for the benefit of Entuity itself and from any other product that was feeding from Entuity as its data source.
And then I think the only thing I wish we would have spent a little bit of time on, but I'll just bring up because it's tangentially related, right? So we talked a lot about API polling, which has this sort of analog to SNMP polling, and the user-defined model sort of fits really well and works there. One of the other modern techniques that seems to go hand in hand, right? The new version of it, if you will, right? We used to have SNMP traps, and now we have webhooks, right? And just thinking about, I know we wanted to talk API polar, but if we could get, with just a couple of minutes we have here, JD or Matt, right? Put you on the spot, right? But what do we, just give us 2 seconds on how that fits or is related, or maybe it's not, and just the nickel tour, as it were.
Well, basically on the webhook front, the simple way of looking at it is that it's the API equivalent to an SNMP trap, an asynchronous, unsolicited piece of information coming from a data source, and we can then pick that up. In reality, we believe that it can be used beyond that, that if you've got information that is going to be fed on a repetitive rate by multiple webhooks coming in from a data source on a continuous basis, that could then be turned into a data stream. So you have not only the something's gone wrong or something's gone over threshold type of use of a webhook, but there's the send information every minute about the following metrics, and that could then be taken in and manipulated as a data source, rather than thinking of it as a flash in the pan event type metaphor. So both are relevant, and both should be able to be handled via the webhook support that we've now got in the product.
Oh, that was a bigger answer than I thought, and that's exciting. I think you might have just picked a topic for next time, right? It sounds like there's a lot of kind of advanced concepts there that would be helpful to have in the toolbox when you're getting asked to, can we monitor this, right? So great. Well, I think we're starting to have some people drop, and I want to be respectful of that. I guess I'll do a last call for kind of questions or feedback on the format or the session. And I'll just remind kind of the group, if if you want to dig deeper on any of this, or hear more, right? Please follow up with your account manager, or JD or myself or Matt, right, with the question, and we can dig deeper, right? I think that these are kind of advanced topics, but interesting ones, right? So the hope here is to start to build some community around how we can all leverage Entuity to solve those problems we have, right? So thanks so much for taking the time. I know that everybody's busy and has a lot going on, so it's definitely appreciated that we're able to take the time and the participation from the group to ask questions and kind of guide the conversation, right? Any last remarks from you, Matt?
Nothing from me, thanks, Jordan.
Sure. JD, last chance.
The only thing I would say is that this is the type of feature in the product that is almost only limited by your imagination. If you've got an imagination as to what you want to achieve, and you've got some data sources that contain the data you need, this is the glue logic to put it together and achieve your goal.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put that, JD. Oh, last minute question. Okay, so I read this as if we are pulling multiple APIC controllers that are in a same, Cisco's word is realm, right? So they have common devices, right? So we would see dupe events for the kind of associated devices under the APIC. Would the UD puller be able to dedupe that, or would that be a function of the EMS rules, or how would we kind of approach that problem space?
I think in all likelihood, that's more likely to be able to be addressed by the event management system, the EMS, than the user-defined poller.
So the poller would bring in the dupes because they were true for both APICs, right? But EMS would give us the ability to correlate those events into maybe a single incident or something similar, right?
Well, the support for the APIC that we have out of the box handles the importing of events. There's no need for any form of user-defined polling. We can pull in the faults and events directly from the controllers, from the APIC controllers. So we are generating the events into the event management system, and so it has the information it needs to then wade through them.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. But in if it was an APIC, right? There would be an EMS use case to deal with dupes, right? If we were encountering that, right?
That's how I would imagine it best being tackled.
Yep. Okay. Great. JD, you look ready to answer.
Yeah, that the last question from Tim about creating objects, that is where I would say wait for what we have in store for the Q3 patch. That is where we would be creating objects based upon what we find coming back from an API call for child objects from a controller. So just wait a little longer and we've got more for you.
Okay. I think with that, we can we'll do a final last call for the group. And if not, I will start to say we'll see you next month for the next topic. Susan, do we have one locked in, or should they stay tuned for the emails with what's next?
Oop, can you hear me now?
Sure can.
Double muted. Yeah. So stay tuned for next month. We don't have something exactly up on the roster right now. I think we've got some good conversation generated from this session. So yeah, stay tuned. We'll definitely update the group as things progress.
Susan, just more housekeeping. The video from this will be posted on the support site, and I think Tim was looking for maybe a transcript or something. So we're looking to see what we can do there, right? And some of the follow-up items that were asked for, right? I know we had an ask around maybe a onboarding example, right? How to approach a business partner to say, hey, we need this to monitor an API, and a couple other questions. So is the support site where we're going to do that? Will it be through additional email push or kind of a mix?
So we're going to post the video on the Entuity support site, but we will also be sending out an email after this webinar with the link to the video as well for those who participated or were not able to participate. And any questions that are in the chat from today that did not get proper answers, we will be following up after this call, probably within the next 1 to 2 weeks max.
Great. No, and I think an organized summary, probably with the transcripts, pretty achievable. There's a we can pull that together. I don't think too hard. So. With that, I guess we'll give a couple of minutes back and see you guys next month. Thanks so much, everybody. And yeah, stay tuned for more follow-up.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye all.